The Key to the Indian by Lynne Reid Banks. Chapter 11, The Snake Charmer. As the boy ran, Omri, jolting about, trying to hold himself steady by clutching the roll of cotton at the waist of the loincloth, was trying to figure out time. How long had he been here? 1 hour? More? If his body were still in the front seat of the Ford, and if the Ford were rolling along the main road to the southwest on the way to Dartmoor, his dad must soon notice that he was not just normally asleep, that Guion in the back, slumped against the ancient knapsack, was also unconscious. It wasn't like either of them to sleep through a daytime car journey. Anyway, his dad always stopped off for a coffee and a snack when he was doing a long drive. It couldn't be much longer before they were taken back. It was just a matter of hanging on. Unless Omri's dad had himself gone somewhere when the key turned. Did he have anything on him that would take him back to some station in time, some layer of the past? Something in his pocket, perhaps, as Omri had the little elephant? In which case, there would be nobody to turn the key, nobody who knew how to bring them back. Horrendous, the worst. Back here in 19th century India for good. No, he wouldn't believe anything so appalling. He pushed the thought out of his mind. He craned round the boy's thin waist and looked behind. He could see the little girl panting along in his wake. She was holding Guion tightly pressed to her chest. Omri could see he was clinging for dear life to her blouse, with his legs scrabbling and swinging about, trying to find purchase on the folds of her skirt. Where were they going? They were running past a line of bungalows, set about with palms and other tropical trees, the homes of rich people. Omri could see Indian gardeners at work, and in the street was a passing parade of rickshaws, people on bicycles, carts pulled by buffaloes, many people on foot, and an occasional horse-drawn carriage, always occupied by a white person, the men in khaki safari suits, and the women dressed much like Jessica Charlotte, only in more summery clothes. The air was hazy, and there was a strong smell of dust and flowers and spicy cooking, mixed with a sharp, acrid, choking whiff of burning rubbish. The sun beat down on them. Omri began to wish he had a solar toupee. Suddenly, they were back where Omri had started, in the big open space. He noticed now there was a market in progress there, but it wasn't like an English one. There was a terrific din, for one thing, and masses of color and movement as hundreds of people struggled to buy and sell in the thick crowds of animals as well as humans. There were few slabs or tables. Mostly people had their wares laid out on the ground, mounds of fruit, fires, cooking things, cages with animals and birds in them, sacks full of all kinds of strange things Omri had never seen before, seeds, powders, roots, bunches of greenery, nut-like things, which added a new, intriguing medley of smells that Omri caught and sniffed as his captor ducked and squirmed among the sellers. At the far end, there was a stage that Omri had been dancing on when he first arrived. It was empty now. The formal entertainment was over, though there were various jugglers, musicians, and magicians moving about the crowd. Omri saw a man up ahead, sitting cross-legged in the dust, with a basket in front of him, playing a pipe. A large snake was rearing out of the basket, swaying in sinister fashion. A cobra! Omri knew it by its hood. The boy was going to pass right by it. Omri instinctively ducked as they squeezed past. The cobra's head was just level with his face, well within striking distance, but it never even moved. It must be half asleep. The boy ran up to the stage, took a flying leap onto it, which brought Omri's stomach halfway to his mouth. Immediately a big man with a beard and a curled mustache leapt on from the other side and ran at him, shouting threateningly with his fist. The boy promptly jumped down again. At this moment his little sister came puffing up. They crouched down almost under the stage and held a conference. This gave Omri and Guion a chance to exchange a few frantic words. "I told you! Stromboli! They're going to try to earn money with us," hissed Guion. "Yes, and we must just do it, whatever they want." "What? Dance? Sing?" Guion was aghast. "Just jump about. Nobody will pay any attention. They'll think it's a trick. Look at all the people here who are doing crazy things." "You are nuts. If this crowd sees two stringless puppets jumping about, they're going to tear us to pieces between them." Omri thought fleetingly of the dozens of street urchins who had tried to get their hands on him when they thought he was just a regular puppet. "So what do we do?" "Lie down and pretend not to be alive." Omri realized that this was their best bet. Besides, the kids deserved to be shown up. If he had ever tried to put his little people in a show, it would have served him good and right if they'd lain down and played dead. The boy raised his head, peeped across the stage. The angry man with the mustache had gone. He and the girl stood up cautiously. The boy took a deep breath and started to shout. He was trying to attract a crowd to watch the show, but he could hardly be heard. And nobody paid attention. He shouted himself hoarse, and the little girl squeaked and waved her free arm every now and then, the one that was not clutching Guion. At last, it looked as if they would have to give up. But then suddenly a merchant from a nearby stall came to their rescue. He moved to the children, smiling a broad, snow-white smile. Through his gray whiskers, he bent down and evidently asked the boy what he was trying to do. The boy, who was nearly in tears, explained with gestures. He jerked Omri out of the top of his loincloth and held him in front of the man's face and shook him. Omri hung limp. He could just imagine what the boy was saying. "I want people to watch. Look, he's alive." The merchant hardly glanced at Omri. He smiled indulgently and patted the boy's head. He said something soothing and turned back to his stall. He had a real stall with brass and copper pots of all shapes and sizes ranged on it, and others dangling from a rail beneath the awning. He reached between them and unhooked something from deep in the shadows of his stall. Omri gasped. It was the chimes, his mother's young-at-heart bowls. Only now they were new and shining reddish bronze in the sun. He could see the beautiful exotic designs of dragons clearly on the upturned bowl shapes. The merchant had a stick in his hand. He held up the bowls by their cord and struck the largest one at the top. It issued a deep, resonant gong-like tone. People nearby stopped what they were doing and glanced round. The merchant, smiling broadly, struck the next bowl, the next, down to the smallest. Then he played a little tune with the 5 notes at his disposal. By this time a small crowd had gathered. The merchant gave the boy a little wink. Then he stepped onto the stage and began to harangue the crowd. He pointed his stick at the 2 children and evidently advised people to watch. He made jokes and people laughed. Omri could see they were getting into a good mood. Ready to be entertained, the merchant beat the chimes again, and then reached down and, putting his hand into the boy's armpit, hiked him onto the stage in one easy movement, like an elephant lifting something almost weightless in its trunk. Next moment, Omri felt himself snatched out of the boy's hands. A big, powerful hand held him now and raised him high, shaking him above the crowd while the resounding voice went on. A skilled showman, this. He had the crowd with him now. Scores of people were crowding to the foot of the stage, laughing and excited. The little girl reached up her hands, one of which held Guion. The merchant handed his chimes to the boy and took Guion from the girl, while eager hands from the front of the crowd lifted her onto the stage beside her brother. Now Guion, too, was being waggled and dangled before the audience. Omri could easily imagine that the man was saying, "Look, puppets without strings, now watch how the little ones will make them dance." The big man suddenly decided to get more playful. He tossed Guion one way and Omri the other. They flew past each other, each suffering an agony of terror before the opposite hand caught each of them. The crowd applauded the little piece of juggling. Encouraged, the man did the same trick several times more. Omri heard Guion let out a cry as he hustled past, the kind you make when you're on a terribly scary ride at a fair, but fortunately nobody seemed to hear. Omri, for his part, thought he might very well throw up. What if the man missed and he dropped him on the stage? He could hardly keep still. He wanted to twist himself free, but he knew his only hope was to lie perfectly limp with tight-shut eyes. It had been Guion's good advice. Omri only hoped his brother was taking it himself. He felt himself being passed back to the boy. The crowd was silent now. He couldn't hear anything except the cawing of crows and the more distant noises at the far end of the square. It was a poised, anticipating silence, like a held breath. The boy held Omri up before his own face. The big dark eyes in the thin brown face stared into his. He could plainly see that Omri was alive, that he was there, and he whispered something to him. And again Omri guessed what it probably was. "Go on, do it for us, please." And a ridiculous, quixotic, and terribly dangerous urge came over Omri. He wanted to do it. Impressions and ideas flashed through his head. He guessed these kids were the children of Matt's servants. He knew from the little scene in the bungalow sitting room that Matt could treat his servants unkindly. Jothy had looked really frightened, as if were her husband to lose his job because of spilling paint on the solar topee, it would be a complete disaster for them. The children were thin like their mother. The reason the boy's eyes were so big was because his face was bony and pinched. The plea in those eyes was plainer than language. Looking sideways, Omri saw the little girl, smiling, hugging Guion to her chest like a beloved doll, like a magic doll who could make wishes come true. Omri knew it would be far, far safer to pretend they were just toys, and hope no one would notice. Let the kids be shamed, let the crowd jeer at them, or even chase or beat them for disappointing the people. Soon, Omri's dad must notice, must stop the car, turn the key, and bring them back, and then he and Guion would be out of it. What did a couple of skinny Indian kids who lived decades ago matter? The boy squeezed him gently like a hug of encouragement and bent down. The next second, Omri's feet were touching the stage. He did not go limp and fall down. He stood there, swaying. The crowd gasped. The merchant began to play a little tune on the chimes. Omri slowly lifted one foot and then the other. He lifted his arms. He turned his head. He did it all, stiffly, like a doll. In Coppelia, the ballet his mother had taken them all to see once when they still lived in London, not like a real live person. The crowd was paralyzed. Omri could see their faces huge and terrifying, like open-mouthed gigantic masks, all their dark eyes fixed on him. He let his eyes slide sideways to see what Guion was doing. He saw him lying on the stage, but his head was up, and he was watching him with the same stunned expression as the mask-like faces in the crowd, and suddenly the merchant looked down and saw them, really saw them. He let out a harsh cry. He stopped tapping the chimes and let them fall with a clash. He just stood there. When the music stopped, Omri stopped, one foot and one hand in the air. He didn't know what to do next. There was a terrifying silence. And then, into that silence, a gentle little thread of music floated, weird music. Nothing that had happened since they got here had made Omri so sure that he was in another time and in another dimension of existence as that sound. It was played on a pipe this time, and Omri saw the crowd part, and the old Indian who had been playing for his snake slipped through, blowing his pipe. He squatted down on his haunches till his old, wrinkled brown face was level with Omri's. His eyes twinkled under the voluminous folds of his white turban, and something passed from his eyes to Omri's. He didn't seem at all surprised. He looked at Omri as if he loved him. He nodded as he played, as if to say, "I know why you're doing this. You're a good boy. Go on." And Omri, as if the music moved